What is going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 26 of the Laugh to Learn podcast. Holy, I need to stop freaking out about how many episodes there's been because we're getting up in the numbers. I guess 50 is going to be the next big one, and that's basically a year almost. So, your weekly source for a comedic spin on all the goings-on in the world. My name is the same as it's always been. It's Jacob Paveo, and I come to you from the Great White North every Tuesday evening, Eastern Standard Time, fresh for download to listen to at work on Wednesday morning for everyone all around the world. Side note, I literally realized last week that I never introduced myself. I've never said my name in any of these podcasts until week 25, other than the episode I did with Mate, because I introduced both of us at the beginning, but yeah, so dumb move on my part. You'd think it was my first time talking on a mic, but here we go. Shameless self-promo is something that I was not doing until now. So yes, my name is Jacob Paveo, and yes, I come to you every single Tuesday evening, so you can download it Wednesday, listen to it at work. This podcast, comes to you ad-free each and every week, and all that I ask is for you to subscribe on any platform that you choose to listen to it on, and tell your friends about me. Tell them in person, tell them over social media, just tell someone every single week, please tell someone about me. And don't be embarrassed, because I'm the dumbass, right? If you're hey, I listened to this podcast and someone listens to it, they're like, that's a fucked up podcast. Be like, yeah, the guy that hosts it's fucked up. That's what I like about it. And then what are they going to say, right? You're not the weird one, I am. So just put it all on me. Put it all on me. For today's episode, I'm going to be covering the greatest, most important political event of the year that happened this past week. No, not the Democratic debate, because, of course, the Democratic Socialist Convention, the first ever, happened this week. So we need to take a nice dive into those deep waters, very deep and murky waters. No matter how liberal you are, I guarantee you I'm going to find a point to make you laugh. As well, I'll be doing a rant on how no one seems to enjoy the great outdoors anymore, and that makes me sad. But to start us off this week, I'm trying a few different things, right? My science podcasts have done very well. My political podcasts have not. So I'm going to try to do a business podcast, because that's somewhere in the middle, and see how these numbers do. And that's going to kind of gear me towards how I'm going to, I want to do what people want to listen to. And what I find is the more politics I talk about, the less people stick around for the podcast, which is cool with me, because it is rather exhausting to be constantly covering politics. And whereas something like when I talked about last week, the asteroid collision, that's something that I've been dying to talk about. I talked about the discovery of gravitational waves a few weeks ago. That's something I've been dying to talk about. There's so many topics in science that I would love to get into. And there's enough that I can literally do this every single day till the day I die, and I still will have topics that I hadn't covered. So I really, really like doing those science podcasts, and there's going to be more, but they take a lot more time to research. So I need a week like this in between each science podcast. And if I could do something about the business world, which is what I'm going to try today, that would be cool. So let me know what you think. I'm going to be, my first topic of the day is going to be answering a question that was posed in the second round of Democratic debates. Of course, I won't be covering the debates because no one likes those episodes, so instead, I'll just be answering a question they answered, and it's whether or not a company can become too large and if it should be forced to separate at a certain point. Super interesting topic, and it's going to be a good one. Let's get to it. Hey, check it out! It's the Laugh to Learn podcast! can a company become too large? It's a really, really interesting topic, and it's one that I've approached many different times in the past in my personal life, but I've never really broached the topic publicly. And honestly, I'm not going to lie, this week I had no idea what I wanted to talk about. So I was scrolling through my phone because every once in a while I'll write down, like I'll just quickly, not write, I guess I'm typing. It's 2019, right? So I'll type a topic that comes to mind into my phone, and, the odd time I'll use one. Well, this is one of those times because I was like, uh-oh, what am I going to talk about? And I wrote it down during the debates this past week because they asked the question, can a company become too large, and at what point, or should we, and then at what point should we break them up? And my very first thought is, honestly, I don't know. I don't really know. So I'm going to take you through exactly what I went through. So first, I started by looking up what are the largest companies in the world. Now, this is actually more complicated than you would think because there's a list on Forbes called the Forbes 2000, where every year they list the 2,000 most valuable companies, but these aren't necessarily the largest. So it starts with 3 Chinese banks, followed by an American bank, and then another Chinese insurance company, and then an American bank, and then an American insurance company, and then another Chinese insurance company, and then some oil companies, blah, blah, blah. But they're not the most valuable companies, right? So just because you're the biggest doesn't mean you're actually the most valuable. And that's the way that I think you have to look at things. Like, what does it matter if you're, you can say, oh, I'm the biggest, but there's a guy over there who's literally, like, the largest company in the world right now. The number one on the Forbes 2000 list is a Chinese bank that's worth $300 million. However, the largest company by market share, or by market capital, is Apple, which has $900 billion, right? $300 billion to $900 billion. It's 3 times more valuable than a $300 billion company, right? So I don't understand how you can say they're a bigger company. But I'm going to go with the largest companies by market capital or market value. So number one, as I just alluded to, is Apple, which has $900 billion in market capital. After them, I'm not going to put the values of these companies up because, quite honestly, I didn't write them down. I don't have that webpage open anymore. But in order, it goes Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, which is a U.S. computer services company, and it freaks me the fuck out that I've never heard of them, and they're the 4th largest company in the world. Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's holding company, the billionaire Warren Buffett, not the one that's wasting again in Margaritaville. Facebook, and then finally Alibaba. And then after Alibaba is where a whole bunch of banks started to come into play. And for the purposes of this conversation, I don't think it's realistic to talk about separating a bank, like that a bank has so much money we have to separate them, because it's just the way that the banking system works that I hope these are some of the most valuable companies in the world, and I don't want them to separate, right? I want to belong to a bank that has billions and billions of dollars in their bank account, but you know what I mean, in their bank accounts that they hold for everyone. Because that's very important to me, is that if my money gets stolen, they can cover it in insurance and whatnot. So it's just a really interesting perspective when you line these companies up, because Apple, Microsoft, both obviously computer companies, number 1 and 2. Then, as we go down the list, Amazon, Alphabet, which is another computer company, and then Berkshire Hathaway. So Amazon, largest retailer in the world. Apple and Microsoft, the number 1 and 2 largest hardware manufacturers in the world, followed by a computer servicing company, which probably makes a shit ton of money off Apple and Microsoft, and then Berkshire Hathaway, which is essentially, they make all their money from insurance. They own, like, ING, the little lizard. They own the fucking lizard. Warren Buffett, not the Margaritaville one, owns the Geico gecko. Sorry, I said some other insurance company. It's Geico that they own. Followed by Facebook, which is another tech company, and Alibaba, which is the Chinese version of Amazon, of course. This is insane to think about, because you're talking about all companies that sell products to people. It never used to be this way. There never used to be companies, if you look historically, selling products that were making more than everyone else. It used to be manufacturers. It used to be car companies, really, is what it used to be, right? Ford was super rich. GM, super rich. And they're just not anymore. I mean, they're still super rich, don't get me wrong. They're still billion-dollar companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. But Apple has 900 billion. You know what I mean? Microsoft, I think Apple was 960 and Microsoft was like 940 billion. It's insane. I remember in school when Apple had 100 billion, they broke 100 billion. Everyone was like, holy shit, $100 billion. Well, now they're coming close to 1 trillion. With a T, 1 trillion. In 2020, it'll probably happen. If not, certainly 2021. Apple will have $1 trillion in value. That's a number that we can't even fathom. Like, you just can't, right? So that's why this idea of, can a company get too large that it needs to be separated, is super important. It's an important thing to talk about, and it's a super relevant thing to talk about. Is it a real thing? Well, look to the law, because I went through and scoured all over the Google, and my computer keeps sending me to Yahoo. Fuck Yahoo, first of all. It has to be Google. And I'm going to talk about Google in a second. What I found was a whole lot of articles, mainly from 2018, that were talking very pro breaking up companies. They seem to really, really want to. And, you know, like the Verve and the Ringer, all apparently at least pro-separation, or the writers at those papers, those websites, whatever, were very pro-separation. But there's little writing on this in general, especially over the past 12 months, likely because their political slants have skewed in one particular orange man's direction. And they're just not thinking about this right now. But since the question was posed, I want to look into it. So legally, in 1890 in the U.S., and this is a very American-based conversation, let me preface before I go any further with that, because these companies really only exist in the U.S. and China. Shell is based in the Netherlands. They're a super wealthy company. I mean, you get random ones here and there, right? The wealthiest Canadian company is RBC, and they're the 42nd in the world. So, you know, I'm not going to talk about Canada in this. So, in the U.S., in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act prohibits agreements in restraint of trade and abuse of monopoly power. Justice Department can go to federal court to stop illegal behavior and impose remedies. And this is really the only law that's been written. There's tons of things that have been attempted to pass, and I'll talk about one extreme bill that was proposed recently, the last year or so, in a second. But I just want to cover exactly what this 1890 Act, which is the current law, really means. So it prohibits agreements in restraint of trade, which means I cannot sign an agreement with someone which limits or restrains trade of other companies, right? So I can totally cut a deal with you. That's like a no-compete clause. That's allowed, right? I can sign a deal saying, you know, I will buy this product from you, but you can't sell this product to anyone else. That's actually allowed, right? For example, like athletes, right, sign contracts all the time that say you're going to come and play for me and you can't play for anyone else, right? Totally allowed. But what you can't do is cut a deal which restrains the trade of two non-signing companies. So I can't cut a deal with, so for example, the Raptors, because Toronto, if they had signed Kawhi Leonard, they would not be able to sign a deal with him that states something like, agree to play with us, and Danny Green then cannot go and sign with the Lakers, right? They can't sign that deal on their own, right? You cannot sign a deal which prohibits the trade of non-signing businesses. Further to that, It also says it prohibits agreements in restraint of trade, as we said, and abuse of monopoly power. This is where we get into the idea of breaking up companies, because if you sign an agreement to buy another company and you become a monopoly by doing so, meaning no one else is competing in your space, that's defined as illegal. Now, everyone owns businesses in 2019. Look, you're listening to my podcast right now, right? Realistically, if Disney was to come out and buy all the biggest podcasts in the world, right? They're going to buy Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro and those American history guys and Car Talk and all the biggest podcasts you can possibly think of, Rooster Teeth, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. Would that be creating a monopoly? Well, I'm still here, right? I mean, Disney can feel free to buy me, let me tell you. But that's not going to happen anytime soon. So is that a monopoly if someone of my size is still competing? Well, a lot of people argue no, that it's not. Small family-owned companies do not allow for or do not cancel out a monopoly. Unfortunately, that is actually defined as an oligarchy, right? It's oligarchical business practice where there are a few businesses that get all of the money and then a few remaining businesses that get a little bit of the money. So to counter the idea that you could have these oligarchies, and they're often referred to as monopolies, but that's not what you'll ever have, right? There will never be an industry where there's only one company offering that service because like I said, everyone owns companies, right? It's just whether or not they're relevant. Like, if Disney went out and bought all those largest podcasters in the world, would my podcast be relevant enough to compete? No. And that's kind of the idea, is that right now, it's more likely than I can compete against them than if they all combined. Now, I still have very little chance, but I can still have somewhat of a shot. But if they all gather together under Disney, right, then all of a sudden that's it, because they've got everything behind them and no one can compete with them, right? No one can. So that's kind of the idea. So Amy Klobuchar, Democratic candidate from Minnesota, also she's in the House right now, I believe. She proposed a bill recently, in the last year or so. She proposed it that will block companies with over $100 billion market cap from acquiring other businesses. And this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about, where she doesn't want to separate them, but she wants to block them. Now, I don't know, block them from purchasing businesses. Now, I don't know what's worse, to either separate them or to tell them you are what you are and you cannot grow and expand. So my opinion on this is quite simple. You absolutely cannot separate businesses. Because if you start telling companies that when you reach a certain point, we are going to tear you apart, all of a sudden investment drops. No one wants to invest in any business of any sort in your country, because that means that I can only make so much money. And what it will actually do is create a bell curve of sorts, where a business can grow and grow and grow and grow, but then they'll get to a certain point where investors start going, we're getting too big, and they all start pulling out because they don't want their money to disappear, right? They don't want that business to get split in two, where it can't work together, and you're basically forming two new businesses. And the likelihood of failure at that point, no matter how large the company, would be monstrous. So everyone starts pulling their money out, and then as a bell curve does, it peaks, and then you'll start seeing it come back down instead of the company continuing to get more valuable, which we see today. I don't think that that's a good thing for anyone, right? If right now something was passed where a company has to get split in two once it reaches a certain point, right? A bunch of experts have to go into a room and separate the assets and create two new companies with a new board of directors, and split the board of directors and hire a bunch of new people, blah, blah, blah. The cost, who's going to pay for it? It's got to be the company, right? And that's just wrong, because the taxpayers shouldn't be paying for it. And then beyond that, like I said, the likelihood of one of those two companies failing is astronomical because everyone's pulling their money out. And then if they all like the current CEO, let's say, maybe all the investors go to his company. And then the new CEO that gets brought in or that gets promoted has no one backing them, right? And you're literally starting a new company with like a market capital of, several hundreds of millions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. Starting a new company at that point. It's I would actually go so far as to say that it's ridiculous, right? So, no, I don't think we can separate companies. But then can you block them from purchasing other companies? It's, again, a really, really interesting proposal because really when a company is that big and they're buying someone else, is it because they are buying innovation or is it that they're just buying out competition? Well, I actually have a very optimistic point of view on this because of what I've seen personally, just colloquially, right? Just watching the world. It seems like companies buy one another only when they are going to benefit, right? And I've never seen a company buy someone else for their market share alone. There's always, always, always more to it than that, right? And when you Google it, you can find examples where people say this is, Uber bought a smaller rideshare program, but everyone's like, oh, look, it was competition. But it wasn't a big enough company to matter. And the way I look at it is they owned a technology that Uber wanted, right? And you see that kind of everywhere where every time you see people freaking out that, oh, they bought this company, that way they could get rid of the competition. I'm not saying you're entirely wrong because it is, like, of course, that's part of the decision making, right? Of course you want to get rid of as much of the competition as you can. That's part of running a business, right? We had meetings at the beginning of this year about a big competitor that's coming into our area in my work, right? And it was like, okay, how are we going to deal with it? And if we had the money to just buy them out, would we? I mean, maybe, but that's also blowing a shit ton of money if you're not getting anything for it, right? So, like, you don't, the argument is that these companies have enough money that they can just go and buy someone and piss money down the drain. But Apple and Microsoft are within $40 billion in market capital of each other, which is a shit ton of money, but not when you're talking about how much money they have. Right? They're actually fairly close to one another as a percentage. So if you really think about it, Apple can't afford to just go and buy someone who's competing in their space. They can't. To just buy a company that all they're getting from them is market share, right? Because right now, Apple is not the most used phone in the world, and they're doing very well being what they are because they do, phones and computers and laptops. Mainly, and the iPad, right? The three big product, the MacBook Pro, the iPad, and the iPhone. So when you look at it just from the outside looking in, it doesn't make sense that you would have an Apple executive sitting in a meeting saying, yeah, let's buy that company who is a potential threat to us, because at that point you're talking about a very wealthy company, right? Let's buy this company just to get their customers. It doesn't work that way because customer loyalty is a legitimate thing, and it's very likely from a psychological point of view that if Apple came in, and so right now I'm using an Alienware laptop. Apple wouldn't buy Alienware, but we're going to go down that path. If Apple went and bought Alienware, and this isn't, but if this was my 10th Alienware laptop, and I love it, which I do, and I'm obsessed with it. I'm telling everyone, you need to go out and buy Alienware laptops and bags and, computer parts and blah, 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 cameras, everything they make. Well, I'd be really, really upset. I'd be pissed if Apple went out and bought them and just shut them down, right? That's not the way it works. They have to buy them to get something from it, right? And I don't just mean the name. Like, yeah, they can make the Alienware MacBook. Cool, great. But They have to be buying components from Alienware for it to matter. Otherwise, it's just an Apple laptop. And we see that everywhere. Like pop companies will buy smaller companies, and what they'll do is they'll use their recipes, right? They'll use their recipes, and for example, Coke and Pepsi both have bought tons of smaller companies, like Nestea, right? They purchased a company, took the recipe, changed the name, and sold it as that. And that's the way that business works, right? You buy a computer company because they have a part or an innovation that they own the patent to that you really want. Now, do you get the Alienware name? Yeah, and that's great. Do you get the customers? Some might be really upset with you, but some might come over, and that's good too. But really, you're buying it because of that processor that they created or whatever it happens to be, right? That's why you buy a company. You never ever like it's such a naive perspective, honestly, I think, to say that companies are purchased solely because they are becoming competitive. Because to become competitive, you have to have created something. You have to have innovated in some way, right? You can't just be what everyone else is and become super competitive. Look at Amazon. Why are they so competitive? Because they're the first ones who said, we'll get it to your house tomorrow, right? They're the first. No one had said that before. Everyone was selling shit online. They were the first ones to say, we'll get it there tomorrow. And that's what they did. They got it there tomorrow. Why is my podcast so successful? Well, because I'm fucking great, right? And because I'm great, everyone wants to come back and listen. And that's what it's all about. It's all about innovating. You have to be slightly different than everyone else. Just slightly, but enough to be interesting, enough to create your own customer group, create your own market in some way. And then a company like Apple will be like, holy shit, look what they did. That's really cool. Let's buy that company. And they'll propose a purchase and blah, blah, blah. Now, to say that no company over $100 billion in market capital can acquire another business is, as you may have already guessed, in my opinion, also a very bad idea. Primarily because you're telling companies that are super successful that from now on, they have to innovate entirely on their own, right? Part of a growing company who has hundreds of millions of dollars is that on top of their own R&D, they can buy research and development programs from other companies. You can't tell businesses that you're allowed to do that only up until a certain point. And then from here, you can't buy research and development from other people. Because that's not right. That's not fair. It's as strange as it sounds, it's not fair to the super wealthy companies. Because they need to be competitive too. They're super, super important, right? So I've written a few points here that I want to get to. I am kind of reading a script, but it's a little rambly. So is Amazon's consumer-friendly position harmful to society? The fact that they can get you product tomorrow cheaper than most, is it harmful to society, right? Honestly, I don't think so. I think Amazon's size is not a bad thing. And Amazon's one of the only companies that no one has really ever proposed, only one of these companies, I should say, that anyone's ever proposed politically to break up because of how much they help society. So that's a point that we need to go on is if you are benefiting the people, it is not illegal. That 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act only happens, it can only be enacted if you are not benefiting the customers. Society really is what the term should be, but it's written as customers. But if you're not being a benefit to society, then you can fall into this antitrust law. But right now, Amazon is doing everything so well for the people that even though they are essentially a monopoly, they aren't taking advantage of it. They're not boosting prices. They're not boosting shipping costs. They're not boosting their annual subscription costs. It just goes up by a little bit each year, but it's not super high. But why isn't it super high? Because they would lose that market share. They would lose their market. If Amazon came out tomorrow and they were like, because right now it's, I only know in Canadian dollars, it's like $79.99 for a year this past year. And I know it's going up again this year to like 85 or something, or $84.99, whatever the hell. So if you really think about it, if they were to come out and be like, it's going to be $500 for Amazon Prime, everyone would say, well, fuck Amazon Prime, because I can order off Walmart. You know what I mean? Alibaba is here in North America. I can go there. The reason I don't is because Amazon's here, and I have a dope-ass subscription with them. Shit shows up tomorrow, and it's cheap. But if that changes, it's done. That's the way the world works now. That's the way the world works. You don't need to break up Amazon to ensure that they're being an asset in the world, or an asset in our world, right, in the Western Hemisphere. Then I asked the question as well, Amazon pays no money in taxes. This is really interesting, and I pulled these points from a few different articles I was reading, because some people say, well, they pay no money in taxes. We need to break them up to force them to pay taxes. I say we just need to force them to pay taxes. You need to get rid of some of these loopholes. I studied tax. I fucking know the loopholes. I don't know all the loopholes, but I know they're there, and I know there are people who make a shit ton of money to research and know everything about those loopholes. I have friends that do it for a living now. It's not for me, but some people do it for a living, and it is fucking ridiculous. There's no one out there who has it all memorized. It's massive. Actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson talked a few weeks ago about how he studied astrophysics, and he never saw a textbook as big as the textbook for a tax class, which a student had in one of his lectures one time. And it's fucking true. In Canada, it's 2 textbooks, like one's a workbook, one's a textbook. That's a total of about 600 pages. And then we have the ETA, the Excise Tax Act, and it gets a little bigger every year because they add to it every year and they make amendments and whatever. But when I was in school, it was roughly 3,800 pages, I think it was, or something like that. So both those together, it's like 4,500 pages of textbook. And that's for one tax class, right? And you have to do 2 at the university level, and then to become a CPA who specializes in tax, you have to do an additional tax course, as well as a self-study course on tax, so that's 4 in total. It is crazy. And that's just in Canada, and I know the U.S. tax laws, it's I don't want to say it's similar. It's similarly complex, but there is a little bit more in the corporate side of taxes in the U.S. and a little bit less in the personal side as compared to Canada. But anyways, this isn't a tax conversation. I should do one in like March or April of next year. So what about Uber? Because Uber is one of those companies, again, that everyone loves. They dropped the prices. If you were to divide Uber in half because of how big they've become, all of a sudden that would go away, just like it would with Amazon. It doesn't make sense to say that once Uber reaches a certain point, actually, I'm not sure what Uber's market capital is, and I'm going to look it up right now, but does it make sense to say that Uber should be taken down, or rather refrained from purchasing other companies only because they've reached $100 billion? So their projection at the end of 2019 is 120 billion. At the end of 2018, they were 76 billion. So that means that at some point in the next month or two, maybe 3 months, they should reach $100 billion in market capital, and they shouldn't be allowed to buy anyone else. They shouldn't be able to invest in any other companies. They're one of the fastest growing companies in the world, and you're just going to put a stop to that? It doesn't make sense. All they're doing is making money for themselves and helping people like me who, especially, I have a car when I'm here, but when I travel, I'm always using Uber. I was in the States, when's the last time I was in the States? I don't actually know. The last time I can think of was, L.A. Yeah, I was just in L.A. a few months ago. And Ubered everywhere. Ubered absolutely everywhere because it's so useful. It's so much cheaper than cabs, and it's right on your phone. if you get lost, you just open Uber and you're like, fuck, we've been walking around Hollywood for a while. No idea where the fuck we are. It's like 2 a.m. Throw open the Uber app and someone shows up to pick me up right there, like in this ratchet ass neighborhood in Hollywood. That's true story that happened to us. So, these are fantastic companies that I don't think it makes sense to put a cap on these. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is Google. Because the biggest problem people seem to have is that Google certainly has a monopoly. They have 90% of the search engine market share in the world, and I think the other 10% is people who, like me, who log into their computer and it automatically updated to search with Yahoo again, like mine did today. That's where the other 10% comes. No one intentionally searches Bing and Yahoo and all that shit. No one does. And if you do, you need to see the light. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, okay? You need to be on Google because it's the shit. It's so much easier. It's so much more effective. Today when I was doing research, I didn't realize I was on Yahoo, and I was like, why the fuck can't I find what I'm looking for? Once I noticed I was on Yahoo, I'm like, fuck, that's why I wasted 20 minutes today. Google.ca, enter, typed in what I was looking for, did a little lip. Oh, oops. When I said Google.ca, enter, my phone started searching for Google. And yeah, you have to switch to Google. So the real problem people have with Google is they prefer, or they show preference to their own companies in search engines or to advertisements, right? For people who have bought ads with Google. And is this a problem? Should it lead to the company being divided or not allowed to invest in other businesses? Well, first of all, should it stop them from investing in other businesses? No. Second of all, is it a problem? Yes. I think it is a problem because it's dishonest. People think the top searches on Google are based on things that were clicked the most. Well, I can literally tell you from personal experience. I haven't bought Google ads yet. I'm going to, but I haven't yet. But if you type my name into Google, the first thing that comes up is Facebook. The second thing after Facebook, and then there's someone else with my name on Facebook, and then there's Twitter, and then there's pictures of me. Hey, what up? And then a whole bunch of Twitter and Instagram and Twitter, and then someone's MySpace account. It's not mine. And then right at the very bottom, the very last thing on the first page is the Laugh to Learn podcast on Apple Podcasts. I can guarantee you, for what my name has, the Laugh to Learn podcast has more clicks than anything else, right? Maybe there's some YouTube videos that, actually for sure there's YouTube videos that have more that are older, but they wouldn't be relevant, right? They wouldn't show up at the top of Google. And then, you go onto the second page, and it's like, what in the fuck is this? There's some live stream weirdness and random people. Like, it's not me anymore, right? I have one thing, the Laugh to Learn podcast, at the bottom of that first page. Because all these other companies, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, they pay Google to show up at the top. Literally. Oh, you know what I keep saying? I keep saying pay Google, and it thinks I'm saying hey Google. Yeah, there we go. That's why my phone... Sorry if you're listening to this out loud and you have an Android phone. That's my bad. So I'll stop saying that. But yeah, all of these companies pay the G company to show up on top. And it's not fair, but I think you have to allow it because it's their own search engine. And to be perfectly honest, you can usually find what you're looking for. Like, if necessary, it is necessary, so I need to buy Google ads, and then my website or my Podbean account will show up first. And you'll see my podcast right at the top, right? And there will be a little thing beside it that says ad, which I think it should show for Facebook, but it doesn't. But, it is what it is because we know that they pay all these companies. But I guess it's technically not an advertisement because they're not advertising my Facebook page. They're just paying to advertise Facebook in general. So it's not a direct advertisement. It's really complicated. But does it mean they should be broken up and separated? No. Does it mean they shouldn't be allowed to buy and invest in smaller companies? Absolutely not. That's just not the way that capitalism works, unfortunately. So, TLDR, if you stuck with me this long, no. I do not believe companies can ever be too large, and I don't think that it's a bad thing that they are getting so big. In fact, I think it's created more room for people like me. It's created the internet with companies like Podbean and YouTube where I can post and you can listen, and it's fucking cool if you ask me. So I have a whole bunch of other stuff to cover today, and I've rambled on for far too long. So, no, I don't think a company can be too large. No, I don't think we should break them up. And I will only come back to this conversation, honestly, if anyone would like to speak with me one-on-one, which I'm always down to. Hit me up on the social medias if you would like to talk about this in person. It would be fun. But for now, I'm going to leave it where it is, and we're going to move on to the next topic. The Democratic Socialist Convention happened this past week, and it is fucking hilarious. I was laughing my ass off going through these clips. I cannot wait to show you, and in fact, I actually don't even know what the first clip I'm going to play is, but I'm just going to line it up and hit play and listen to it with you, and then I'm going to react to it then, and then I'll listen to the other ones ahead of time so I can preface them. But I'm super excited to get into this. For those of you who don't really know, this is a section of the Democratic Party in the U.S. They call themselves the Democratic Socialists, and they are trying to become a major party. And the video is just beautiful. It's blue and red hair everywhere. Every time someone comes up to the mic, as you'll hear, they say their name, their city that they're from, and then their personal pronouns. They have points of personal privilege, which is beautiful. That's a term I've never heard before that I'm so using. Oh, but let's get to the first clip. Let's check it out together.
Great. Point of clarification here on what we're actually... Could you get to the mic, please?
So point of clarification in that the chair gave a report. There was a verbal second from the audience on the report of which was given, and then there was a motion for an amendment to that. What are we actually talking about at this point, and then what is the vote going to be?
Thank you.
We need to be very clear about the work that we are trying to do. It is important.
So right now, we are debating the amendment to the committee report, and that amendment is to swap six of the the amendment is to take 6 different delegates to recognize 6 different delegates from East Bay from what the committee report says.
So in voting yes, are we voting to...
Yes. Yeah, so voting yes
upholds
means...
the delegates?
No. So voting yes means that you want the substitute 6 delegates to be seated instead of the delegation that is outlined in the Credentials Committee report.
And now, similar to that one, here is a clip of the host being asked how many delegates there are, which are the individuals that they are voting to be put in place, where literally, again, no one on stage knows what in the hell is going on. So listen to this one.
Now, we are going to...
Point of information, could you please let us know how many delegates there are?
Anyone know that?
Hold on one second.
Do you know that?
I believe 1,057.
Thank you.
Great. Awesome. And now we're going to move on to the resolutions and
Very
amendments
brief.
committee.
Very brief point of information. If you are using a microphone, talk into it directly like I am right now, and do not wave your face back and forth because people cannot hear you. That is all.
Okay. Awesome.
So this is an absolutely serious political party that they are trying to become. And they're all too young. That's the thing. Everyone in the room, everyone I can see on camera is under the age of 30. It comes across as so rude, but they're so lost. Like, politics isn't for everyone. It simply isn't. It takes so much time to understand the complexities of it. And this is a room full of people that want what they want now. And that is not how politics works. And I would never discourage someone from getting involved no matter what their perspective is. But once you choose to get involved, especially at a national convention that was televised and streamed online. You opened yourself up for this, okay? So the last thing that I'm going to play here, this clip went so big on the internet. In all the political circles it's being circled around. That sounded dumb to say. But it is just absolutely evident of what is wrong with this movement. So this is where I first learned, this is the clip that first taught me what a point of personal privilege was. So check this last clip out, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you so much.
Quick point of privilege. Quick point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Guys, first of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we just, I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronouns?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Okay.
So, at this point in the event, things are calmed down. The reason I brought up the guy asking for people to stop waving their signs earlier was that was like a rowdy part where everyone's getting super into it. This is where people are literally filling out polls on their thing, and they've asked for complete silence so that you're not skewing anyone else's voting chances or whatever the hell you want to say. And this guy went up and he's like, well, we're voting. Can we please not make a lot of noise? Because I'm trying to focus on filling it out. That's something that I'm like, cool. But the mistake he made was he walked up to the mic and he said, hey, guys, can we please not do this? Literally, you have to watch this video. This pink-haired, he didn't introduce, this person, he didn't introduce himself. What the fuck am I doing? And say what his preferred gender was, which I've come out and said I'll use it. If he said he wanted to be a she, I would say so. But didn't do that when he introduced himself. Didn't even introduce himself. Literally sprinted, like stood up, was like, you could see like pissed once he said guys. And then kind of sat back for a minute. And then once the first guy started saying like, thank you, please stop making noise, this pink-haired man went running to that mic and literally pushed this other dude out of the way to be like, point of personal privilege, point of personal privilege. Point of personal privilege. Do not address us as with gender pronouns. Shut the fuck up. You know what it means when someone says, hey, guys. This is the problem. This is the problem. Is you want to be involved in politics, you cannot react that way to something so mundane. You simply can't. This is not a civil rights issue. It's nothing like that. It's not even close. This is simply your opinion, your feelings on how someone else is addressing a large group of people in a completely kind way. He is not being malignant at all by saying, hey guys, I'm trying to fill out this form. Can you please, stop being not be so rowdy so that I can focus and conduct my vote. You cannot overreact to that statement. And if you do, you have no hope in politics. No hope. Your whole party, the fact that they took it seriously, because the girl at the stage was like, oh, yes, sorry. No hope. Not a chance. Not a chance of winning any relevant election, perhaps, as I alluded to last week, outside of the city of Baltimore. But moving on from politics, please stick with me. Don't forget to subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and family. Tell them all about it, mention it at work, and make sure they know all about the incredible vault, a whole library of content available over at laughtolearnpodcast.com or on any major podcasting platform. And of course, a new episode completely ad-free every single Tuesday. As always, thank you so much for the support. Thank you for my supporters that just came out of nowhere down in South Africa. That was interesting. I've kind of all of a sudden had tons of downloads in a few random countries that like significant numbers of downloads, which is really cool. Like really, really cool. So thank you all for that. And I am going to do what I can to keep it coming to you. Of course, you can always reach me anytime on social media. You can hit me up literally on any of my social media platforms. You can also catch me using the contact page over at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com. And yeah, all of that, all those social media accounts can be found in the description for this episode, wherever you happen to be listening to it. So, my final topic of the day is going to be a slight rant on no one enjoying the outdoors. This one's going to be short because we're already at 53 minutes. This is turning into a full hour-long podcast, which it wasn't supposed to be, but here we are. So, I noticed this weekend that literally no one enjoys the outdoors. Everyone wants to be on their phone. No one looks at the sky. No one looks at the birds. I have a very, very hipster-esque, or hippie, rather, not hipster, hippie-esque view of the world where I have a really cool position where I get to live up in the country in what some people would say is the middle of nowhere, but it's not really. And I get to drive into the city every day for work. By the middle of nowhere, I mean there are trees all around me. I can't see my neighbors. I can't hear my neighbors. You could murder me in the backyard, and only the people I live with would be able to hear it. And that's what I prefer. But I get to drive every day into the city. So every morning when I wake up, I get to drive towards Toronto, and I get to see the skyline and the tower and the big buildings, and I work on the outskirts of the city, but the downtown is, I am in the city essentially. But it is a really cool way to start every morning. But then when I leave work, I get to drive back up north, and slowly there's less and less buildings, less and less people, fewer and fewer cities, and then trees and hills and clouds and sky. And every day I get to experience all of that. And then I come home and I can sit in my backyard surrounded by trees and birds and animals, and it's so cool. And then this past weekend here in Ontario was a long weekend. It was our civic holiday. And the cool thing about it is I got to go up to the cottage, which isn't really that far from my house, and it's pretty much the same as being at my house, except there's water there, which is awesome because we got the boat in the water, and just having a good time. But everywhere you look, all the other cottages, as you drive down the street, I saw a bunch of kids outside, young kids playing, but once you reach like the age of 12 all the way up to 100, everyone's on their cell phones looking down. And, you really have to look up. And I wish I actually still had it. I came up with a saying. I actually can't even, it's really pissing me off right now because I can't remember it. I had written it on a whiteboard in my room because I noticed that I was always looking at the ground. This had nothing to do with my phone, but just always looking down. And basically, I wrote on my whiteboard so that every time I was leaving my apartment when I was going to school, it said, always look up, because something like fuck, I can't even remember. It was basically keep looking up because it's always more interesting. It's always more interesting to look up than it is to look down. And it's just like something that I wish it was so much more poetic back then, but I guess I'm old and sinister and I can't remember my poetic days anymore. But it's a true sentiment nonetheless, that as long as you're looking down, you're looking at your phones, you're thinking about work, you're thinking about what you have to do on Monday or what you have to do tomorrow or whatever the case may be, or what you did yesterday or what you did today. All that it means is you're not living in the moment. And I think it's super important for everyone to live in the moment. Like a lot of people say that this is weird, but I don't think about work when I leave work. Like literally the minute I'm out the door, I have either my music on or a podcast on, and I have about an hour drive from work every single day, and I'm not thinking about work. In the morning when I'm driving to work, I'm looking at the skyline, I'm looking at the city, I'm looking at all the weird people and the road rage, and that's what I'm looking at, and that's what's entertaining. I don't think about work because it's just not entertaining. It's work. right? I think about my podcast. What am I going to talk about this week? I check. Maybe someone sent me a message about the podcast. I'm like, oh, that was really cool. I heard from someone in this country or that country or whatever, and they said, hey, I listened to your podcast. It was usually literally every time I've ever had a podcast message, it's ever been I think you were wrong about this, but cool, or the podcast was really cool. And it's oh, sweet, someone from this country was messaging me. That's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm thinking about. So if I can give any advice to anyone, it's keep looking up. Keep looking up, because it's always more interesting. There's always going to be something more interesting than looking down, than looking at your phone, than looking at the ground, don't look where you're walking one step ahead. Look up to where you're going 10 steps ahead, because it's always going to be, you can see 10 steps ahead or you can see one step ahead. And I'd rather see all 10 because it's more interesting. But I hope you take something from that and apply it to your life. There's times where I find myself even just walking down the street, looking at the ground, avoiding eye contact with people or whatever, because, sometimes you're walking, especially at work when I go for lunch or something, I'm in kind of a sketchy area, and you don't really want to look at people, but just look up. You don't have to look into someone's eyes and kiss them and smile at them every time you walk by them, but you could just kind of glance at someone and be like, oh, there's a person, and then keep going about your day and look at the sky. Look up, look up, look up. If I can give anyone any advice in life, that's what it would be. Thank you all for listening. I really encourage you to take all of these discussions outside into the real world with your friends, or with me over on Twitter or Instagram, or using the contact page, of course, at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com. All of that information is, of course, in the description for this podcast. And as always, this podcast is ad-free, and all that I ask is for you to share it with your friends and family. If you made it this far, please give me a share. Subscribe on the podcasting app or whatever platform you happen to be using. And just please tell your friends and family about me each and every week. Tell one person and help us keep growing. Until next time. I was going to steal his line, but I'm not going to. Neil deGrasse Tyson would always tell you to keep looking up. But I like to say, keep on laughing and keep on learning.